Hello, welcome to Surrogate Church. Today I'm going to start with the piece I wrote for Surrogate Church called The Star of David. I love churches. They are beautiful, just beautiful. Stained glass, dark wood, candles, incense, stone statues, cloths of many colors, purple, red, gold, white, fresh flowers, marble. I had a friend named David. He was from England. Dark hair, blue eyes, and goodness that shined like a star. The Star of David that entered my world and crossed the heavens. He looked like Jesus, the way Jesus looks in movies. He loved churches too, empty churches. So that's what we would do. In our short time together, we went to all sorts of neighborhoods and found churches. We'd go inside, look around, sit together, and be still. We belonged to each other in the sanctuary of our silence. When it was time for him to return to England, I asked him to stay. But we both knew he had to go. His roots were there, his family, his girlfriend, his future. I missed him. I wrote to him a lot. His girlfriend did not like that, understandably. We were just friends, but it was mysterious. He had my heart, and I felt like I had his, and she saw that. So communication between us stopped. The silence was no longer a sanctuary. It was loud and torturous and never, ever still. It made me sick, depressed. My heart wasn't broken. It was gone. It just wasn't in my body anymore. I was empty. My family was worried. Something was wrong. At 24, instead of going to therapy or looking into medication, my Italian mystic mother lit a candle for me on the altar in her kitchen, started a novena, and found a spiritist, a medicine woman. My mother took me to the apartment. The woman asked no questions. She took my hand. She closed her eyes. She had a vision. She told my story. A coven of witches in England has taken your words, placed your heart in an iron pot, and are draining your blood. You have taken the heart of one of their men, and so what goes around comes around. Return his heart or you will die. What she said scared me to death. I had been cursed, plain and simple, and now I needed a ceremony to make it right. For 10 days, I had to bathe in specially chosen herbs, pour them over my head, pray to the Holy Spirit, notice the formation of the dried leaves in the tub. Day after day, they would form a snake, the symbol in my culture of evil. My mother began her novena. Holy water was brought into our home. Anointed oil was placed on my head. This curse would not be broken without a fight. I prayed and prayed. The nights were horrible. I was so scared of evil spirits haunting me. I could not stop feeling scared. I wore my cross. I wore my medals. I slept with the rosary under my pillow. I went to Mass. I prayed and prayed and prayed, and still I was scared. The evening of the ceremony, I had to go alone. My family was to stay at home and pray. I dressed all in white. I did not know what would happen. I did not know what would be said. I did not know anything except that the curse would be broken. I believed the ceremony would work. I just did. and I knew it would somehow change my life. A communion, a marriage, an initiation, a passage of some kind, a marker of all that came before and all that was to come after. Incense, candles, 3 mystical women dressed in white, a spiritist, a visionary, a healer. Prayers of the Father, prayers of the Mother, prayers of the Holy Spirit. Me at the center, my hands clenched in prayer, clenched in fear. Back in Brooklyn, the women of the family gathered to pray. The women and my one teenage brother, Louis. Louis filled 2 water guns with holy water. He attached them to his belt. He was armed and ready. My father thought we were all crazy. He believed that evil lived in fear, and since we were all praying because we were so afraid, that just made the evil stronger. He had a point. Evil does feed on fear, but it lives in darkness, and exposing it, bringing evil to the light, is what diminishes it. And oh my God, is that a terrifying process? More prayers, traditional prayers, words said thousands of millions of times in unison and alone throughout the ages became the anchors of courage. A visionary sat before me. She communicated with the powers involved. A deal was made. I was never to contact David or travel to his homeland. She told me I would marry a man I already knew who bears the Star of David. He would bring truth into my life. There would be struggle until all was told. And then it would get better and better and only better. We would have children, at least 3, maybe 5. We would create a home for many children, and we'd find peace, deep, lasting peace. She said my maternal grandmother was with me and would guide me all through this life. She would come to me through quiet thoughts, mostly in the kitchen. Her message to me was, always have a cup of coffee ready for a heart in need. The vision stopped. Prayers began again. The healer worked with herbs and oils and chants, anointing my head, heart, hands. I was commanded to release his heart. I was reprimanded. Never hold a heart with a clenched fist. Apologize for this. I didn't even know what I was apologizing for, but I complied. I'm sorry. Open your hands. Release the heart. I was willing to do whatever they told me. Tell him to go back to where he belongs. Tell him to go to whom he has been promised. Tell him now. And so, after days and days of prayers and pain and fear, the moment arrived where I had to exorcise David from my life. I opened my fist and said the words, David, I release your heart. Go back to where you belong, to whom you have been promised. I had to repeat it over and over again, 3 times, and it was done. His star, the Star of David, that twinkled in my eyes, burned out through my tears, and I was left with nothing. No pain, no fear, nothing but indifference. After a while of nothingness, I was told that my heart was on its way back to me. It had been released. The thought of where my heart had been and the extent to its damage filled me with disgust. I did not want it back. I could live with nothingness. I could not live with a broken heart. I was reprimanded again. Receive your heart. Receive what belongs to you. It is of your body. It is of your blood. Receive what is yours, or it will be lost. I could not comply. I couldn't even pretend to comply. Silence fell upon us, a long, lonely silence. The visionary spoke. The light of divine mercy is pouring through. Blue and red, Jesus has joined us. He has your heart in his hands. He is returning your heart. Do you wish to receive him? Of course I do. The visionary commanded. Close your eyes. This is personal. He wants to keep this personal. I understood completely. I closed my eyes, and there he was, my dear old friend, the Jesus who sat with me in the church of my childhood, the Jesus who was the only boy allowed to attend my all-girls Catholic high school, the Jesus who is now all grown up, stood before me with my heart in his hands. Do you trust me? He asked. I trust you, I answered. It has been a long time, he said. I know, maybe too long, I said. I missed you, he smiled. You did? I asked. I did, he answered. I'm sorry, I whispered. For what? He asked. For pulling you into this mess, I answered. He spoke softly. A heart that is broken opens to the world with an eruption of might and mercy, or it closes off from the world with the corruption of destruction and indifference. The choice is yours. I protested. This is ridiculous. I did not even know David long enough or well enough to be here. He continued, I hold your heart in the hands of divine mercy. I offer you this communion. I sighed. I do not feel worthy right now to receive you. He smiled. Only say the words and you shall be healed. I shrugged. What words? What are the words? He said simply, I forgive you for leaving me. I was confused. Do you forgive me, or do I forgive you? He prayed. Forgiveness going in, forgiveness going out. The feminine face, the masculine face, the Trinity, right side up, upside down, intersecting, creating the Star of David. Love divine cannot exist without mercy. He then said very directly, now receive this communion and speak without fear, for the light of divine mercy will always be with you. He was gone. The ceremony was complete. I was sent home with a bag of herbs and the direction to continue the showers for 11 more days. On the cab ride home, I cried quiet tears of recognition. I had been healed. When I arrived home, my family was there waiting to hear what happened. So I chose to read this piece today because I have my dear friend, my brother, my teacher, my healer in many ways, Bob Vetter, with me. He is a man of ceremony. He is a man who's taught me the ethical practice of good ceremony for healing. And in thinking about him coming on the show, I thought to share this. 24 years old. How? I don't know how I ended up in this ritual, but I have to say there was something so profound about that day because it taught me about the ways of the heart. I did not want my heart back with the breaks in it. It was broken. Even though, as mysterious as it is, I knew David for a very short time, but something about the connection and then the ending of that connection broke my heart. And the choice that I received that day was a heart that is broken either opens to the world with an eruption of might and mercy. Eruption. Hearts that break are mighty. Mighty. There is a power and a voice to that, but it opens with might and mercy. Mercy, the willingness to understand the hurt. And understanding the hurt ultimately leads to the forgiveness of the hurt. Or the choice to close off the heart to the world, close it off, build up the scar tissue, seal up the wounds, and allow for the corruption, those words, the corruption of the heart with indifference. I don't care. Doesn't matter. You don't matter. And destruction. I will destroy you because I no longer have a heart that is open. That was the choice I was given that day. Since that day, I fall in love every day. We all fall in love every day. We all have the opportunity to fall in love every day with a new bloom, with a blue sky, with a smile from a stranger, with a joke we're told online, with the exchange of a simple kindness. Opportunity to fall in love every day. But along with that, my heart also breaks every day. There is something in every day that my heart breaks about. Simple as leaving my dog home, having to close the door while she's looking up at me, breaks my heart. But the breaks allow for the light to pour through. That's the difference. My heart is filled with cracks. It just allows more light to pour through. And that light is one of divine mercy. How do I keep returning? And times have been hard. Times have been very difficult. Personally, globally, it's difficult times right now. How do we allow the light to keep pouring through? And I think one of the ways is to be involved in regular ceremony, in community where people gather to ground a sense of human connectedness. It's funny, over lunch, right before I came on the show, I was talking to Bob and I was telling him about a situation that I'm in, and I'm not sure how to respond. Like, what role do I respond from? Do I respond from the role, I don't know. I just was at a loss. And he said to me, how about respond from the role of human being? Like, oh, of course. Because when we respond human being to human being, then that's where compassion lives. So, this great gentleman is going to be on our couch and willing to share his wisdom with us today. So I'm so looking forward to our talk. Again, thank you for joining us, and let's see where the conversation goes. So, Bob, welcome to the couch.
Thank you, Marianne.
Bob and I are dressed in the blue. We chose this color for a reason. What is it, Bob?
We're vibrant. We're bright.
We didn't actually choose it together. We just were like, we're both in our aqua, so we're very watery today, right? We'll be in the flow of the water. So Bob is an anthropologist, and it's funny, Bob, because you are truly considered one of my profound guides in this lifetime. But my other guide, who is Judith Gleason, who I met in college, she taught a class, creative play in the arts, was also an anthropologist, and she actually studied the African traditions and brought it into a workshop, and I then worked with her for 7 years doing her writing group. So, like, God sends me guides who are anthropologists. I don't know what that's about, but, like the world. And right before we sat down, Bob said to me, okay, Mare, where are we traveling, right?
Exactly.
We could go anywhere in the world in this interview. So I don't know where we'll go to, but it is so good to have you on this couch. Bob is the guy I went to Mexico with. We've spoken about that on the show. I've also worked with you with journeys into American Indian territories. And so you are a scholar, right? You are an anthropologist, but you are also a practitioner. And how do you feel like you have made that, journey from being more in the scholarly understanding of culture to taking on and committing to a practice of ceremony and the type of ceremonies that you're most drawn to?
Well, I think before I ever even went to college, as a youngster, as a teenager, I was absorbed in spirituality and interested in non-Western ways of looking at the world. So as a teenager, I was reading books about Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, all kinds of things.
Now, was that part of your family culture?
No, it's definitely not my family culture.
You just were like called to it.
Yeah, I literally woke up one day and thought that it was something that demanded my interest and my investigation.
And you listened.
And I listened. So
Wow.
as a kid, 14, 15, 16 years old, that's what I became absorbed in. But it was spiritual practice, and at that time, meditation, yoga, burning incense, all of these were things that were sort of fringe, not like they are today where they're much more mainstream. So I was interested in all of those things, but it came out of a deep spiritual hunger. Then when I went to college, I became absorbed in both philosophy and anthropology. And I think the way that I would describe the difference between the two is that philosophy looks at an ideal of what is possible, and anthropology looks at what's real. It looks at what people do. So I had a dual major. Even when I went on to graduate school, I started in philosophy and then went back to anthropology. But I've always been interested in riding that fine line between what is possible for us as human beings and then looking at what people actually do in their behavior.
That is so interesting because I do think it's part of our crisis in our current culture is America has been built on certain ideals, right? And they're the ideals that we all aspire to, this sense of equality and creating a space for all people to really pursue happiness. But what is real is the difficulty of truly living and embracing that concept. And how do you see where we're at right now in this struggle from both those places, the ideal and the real?
Well, I mean, you talked about our country being based on certain ideals, and I think that where we are right now is a time where everything that we were built upon, the foundation is cracking underneath us. And people are scrambling to find a new way, a new place, a new sense of who we are and how we belong in the world. So as a country, I think we're doing that. And I think individuals are doing that. I think organizations are doing that. I think everything about our world is in that kind of flux.
And it feels very terrifying. And it's, even in the piece that I read, I was reminded of how scary it is when things start to crack open.
Yeah.
And this feeling of like evil or darkness coming in versus the light, like these really lofty battles of the good and the evil, and how to navigate that. Now, how do you feel like ceremony or ritual like helps us along in that process, or maybe it doesn't? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so to get back to I'll tie that into the story that I started to tell, which is, so I was very much involved in spiritual practice, but I always thought of spirituality as a solo venture. I always thought of spirituality as something that you do while you're alone. And it would take me many, many, many years and many, many, many experiences to find that, at least for me, and really if we look at global cultures, the way that we heal is in community. And that's where ceremony became so important to me. So my involvement more than anything else was with North American Indians, or at least that was the direction that I would eventually take. So I went to India when I was in college and was involved in all of the things that I mentioned earlier. But in graduate school, I started my studies of North American Indians, beginning with the Comanches and going on to Kiowas and Cheyennes and other tribes of Indians in Oklahoma. And they are very much ceremonial people. And I don't mean to say that every ceremony is one that involves a large group of people. For example, the Vision Quest is one that a person does as a solo venture. But literally every other ceremony that there is one that involves a lot of other people together. And so the more I got to be involved in that, the more I came to see the power, the transformative power of ceremony, and became very much absorbed in that. And then in my own life, that expanded beyond North American Indians to curanderismo, which is a Mesoamerican form. Well, actually, it's a Latin American form of traditional healing. But specifically, I became involved in the Mexican side of that, as you know.
Yes, love.
But in both of those cases, ceremony is something that unites people, because it's, when you talked earlier about that, the way that we use the term human being earlier today at lunch, there's a place where you and I and anybody who's in our circle, in our brokenness, that we share a certain common ground of experience, including the opportunity to grow and transform and heal. So I think back to what an old man who was my first adopted father in the Indian world, his name was Fred Parton, and Fred was a Caddo Indian, and he was a roadman. He was a leader within the Native American church, or the peyote religion. And what he said one time was, anybody who says that they're perfect is a liar.
For sure.
And
yes.
he said, when we're in this teepee, because that's where the ceremonies take place, inside the teepee, he said, when we're in this teepee together, when one of us falls down, it's the job of the others to pick them up.
Yeah, that is very moving, because we can only be as strong as our weakest link. And so to work collectively like that gives a very different mindset, and it also has a very different definition of success. It's not like you are going to step over anybody to get to where you're going for your own sake.
Yeah.
Like, we're all going together. And that does shift in whether, I think, you're in a teepee or you're gathered in a circle that really truly has the intention to heal through understanding of our humanness.
Yeah. Right?
Because none of us are perfect.
Exactly.
That it equalizes everybody.
And it also goes back to what you mentioned earlier about the cracks in your heart.
Yeah.
And how the light can shine through that.
Right.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And it's so true, you know, as a young woman, I did not like the idea of cracks in my heart. Like that was a weakness. Like, nope, I'd rather not have one. I don't want to have this feeling. Because it takes a certain strength to walk with your brokenness.
Yeah. Well, and it also reminds me of another analogy, but you know, useful for thinking, conceptualizing things, but the idea that when a bone breaks, that where the break was, it grows back stronger than it was before.
That's great. That's truth.
So these events in our lives, these painful events in our lives, can either become an opportunity to grow into something greater, or to just wallow in self-pity, or as you said, turn your heart cold and indifferent.
Well, because I think the breaks usually are connected to loss.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't think or maybe we've just forgotten, Bob, I'm not sure, how to really move through a grieving process. Because we get stuck in the grieving process in either anger or denial, but like how to fully move through a grieving process and come to ultimate forgiveness. Because whether you're forgiving yourself or someone else or God for what we've lost, it's not a familiar walk. So are there ceremonies that you've come across in other cultures that like are effective for dealing with this kind of personal loss or community loss, global loss?
Sure. Well, to me, one of the most profound ceremonies is the condolence ceremony of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois. And just a quick version of its origin, and then to talk a little bit about it. There's a story that the Haudenosaunee had a great peacemaker who lived between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. And there's a whole long story, a 10-day story.
10 days to tell.
To tell the whole story. So I'll just pick a little piece of it. But in the story, his goal was to bring peace to the warring lands that he lived in, that he was sent by the Creator to bring a message of peace. And there was another man, Ionwata, who also sought peace. Now, both of them, independent of one another, were finding little pieces of shell wherever they went. And both of them didn't really know what it was for, but they started putting these pieces of shell into a pouch, each into their own deerskin pouch. Ionwata underwent a terrible experience of loss. His daughters and his wife were all murdered by a sorcerer by the name of Tadadaho. And the way the story goes, after all that happened to him, he completely lost his will to live. And he stopped eating, he stopped drinking water, he stopped sleeping, and he was staggering around almost dead. And he was muttering to himself that if he ever came upon somebody who was in a state that he was in, he would do everything that he could to relieve that suffering. Now, the peacemaker just happened to have been walking by and stumbled upon him in that state. So it was in that moment that he realized the significance of these pieces of shell that became the first use of wampum. So he took the wampum that was in Ionwata's pouch and the wampum that was in his pouch, strung it together and held the string of wampum and performed the first condolence ceremony, which was to use his words to remove the dust from him, to remove the lump from his throat, to remove the obstruction in his hearing, so his ability to see, hear, and speak, and return those through this compassionate speech that he came up with. Now that eventually would become a way that Haudenosaunee people would come to deal with the loss of death, both within the family and also within the wider structure. When their leaders would die, they would perform a condolence ceremony and then install the new leader. More recently, the Haudenosaunee people have come up with the idea of using this as a way of dealing with loss in general. So not just the loss of life, but all of the losses that we experience in life lead us to these same problems, these same moments where there's a fork in the road. Because I think that's really what underlies what you mentioned earlier, is that when we have this moment of crisis, that's a fork in the road to either heal from it or to harden ourselves to the world.
Yes.
So the Haudenosaunee today are using this condolence ceremony as a way of dealing with problems like addiction, where people don't have a way of properly processing their emotions and leading to healing.
And that makes so much sense, because truly at the core of most addiction is such inconsolable pain. And it's interesting that this the condolence ceremony opens the eyes, the ears, and the throat, the voice, to hearing, seeing, speaking words of love, I assume, right, would be the ultimate healing. But I'm like so curious about, why were the wampum beads necessary in the ceremony?
You know, we really don't get an explanation of
Right?
why, other than I mean, my speculation is that it's something tangible, it's
Yes.
something that is believed to be sacred, and it's something that is symbolic.
Right, because so many cultures have it. Like, I slept with my rosary beads.
Yeah.
Or there are so many cultures have strings of the beads
That you hold in your hand.
you hold in your hand,
Yeah.
and somehow it connects to spirit.
It's comforting also.
There
Right.
is, right? There's a comfort to that, like you are holding on to something.
In a moment where you have nothing else to hold on to.
Oh, exactly.
That's something to hold on to.
Exactly. It is the connector to spirit.
Yeah.
Now, the peacemaker, as a person of embodiment, right? Embodiment of love and light, and the ability to console, he represented like God on earth, do you think? Like that sense?
So in a way like Jesus?
Yeah.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, what they say specifically is that the peacemaker was sent by the Creator, that the Creator spoke to 4 beings in the sky world, and that he told them to send this messenger to the world with the message of peace. So I would say that we could say that the peacemaker then is the voice of the Creator.
And the fact that he is named like peacemaker, right?
Yeah.
So the work of the Creator is really to have peace.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, what the Haudenosaunee say is that one of the things that they say is that there is no such thing as a holy war. There never could be, and there never will be.
100%. Right?
So if you're bringing about peace, you are doing the work of the Creator. If you're harming another person for whatever reason, that's not the directive of the Creator.
Yeah.
You're acting as a human being.
Do you know anything about the actual ceremony, like the kinds of words that were spoken?
I do. So what I did was I've used this condolence speech a number of times and in a number of contexts. So I went to some of the earliest condolence speeches, looked at the way that those were structured, and then went to what I could find about the more contemporary use of it. And I put them together in words that summarize it. And I use it as a kind of as a meditation for a person to consider the losses that they've had, and then to use these words to condole that loss, whatever kind of loss it is, because as you mentioned earlier, you experience a loss when you walk out the door and your dog is there looking at you. Yeah, but I mean, think about the number of losses that we undergo. So the whole point is that when we fester in anger, that it's that anger that leads to violence.
Yes.
Which is, what is it? It's unresolved grief. So by resolving the grief, it puts us in a position to deal with it and to continue to live our life. Yeah. One of the fascinating things that I found in looking at the Haudenosaunee, the old ways, was that if there was a delegation from another nation or tribe that wanted to visit a Haudenosaunee village, they wouldn't just take the people directly into their village. They would stop at an interim place along the way and perform a condolence ceremony for those people so that they wouldn't come into the village with their unresolved grief.
Wow.
And I think we as a country could learn
powerful.
A lot from that lesson. You know, think about how different your household would be if all that grief was resolved. Think about what a council meeting would be like. Think about what a Senate meeting would be like if people dealt with.
And within that, there is the wisdom that the unresolved grief will play out.
One way or another.
It will play out. And we are so unconscious to it a lot of times because we're also raised with a level of, like, get over it.
Exactly.
Like, brush it off, move on, we're strong, keep walking. But it's there. And that is the brilliance of saying, whoa, before you enter, let's clear this. Otherwise, you will impose it, and there will be corruption of relationship. But imagine, like, our refugees, our immigrants, like coming in and welcoming them with this kind of ceremony.
Yeah.
And especially America, because anyone who comes to us, we're this great opportunity, right? But they are leaving behind. It's, again, kind of what we were talking about at lunch with this idea. They are leaving behind their homeland. Nobody wants to leave their homeland unless something not good is happening there.
Yeah.
You don't want to leave your people, your house, your trees, like, you don't. So that sense of, okay, you're going to be here, and we recognize the loss of you being here versus lucky you get to be here. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Well,
wow.
would you like to experience this condolence speech?
Oh my gosh, yes! Okay, so this is the condolence speech. I'm going to put this out to viewers to just really take a moment, right, to kind of get into a space where you can open.
If you'd like, I'll talk you through it.
Oh, perfect. And as you talk me through it, we're talking everybody through it. So let's make room to really work with our losses.
So, Marianne, then I will ask you to adopt a comfortable posture. Close your eyes, and let's take a few deep breaths together. So let's inhale. Let's exhale together. Again, we'll inhale. Exhale. And one more time, we'll inhale and exhale together, which syncs you and me together. Now, what I'd like you to do is consider the losses that you've experienced over the course of the last year. And think about what they were. Think about what they have meant to you. Think about how that has impacted your life. And connect with that. Understand the emotions that go behind that. And normally I would give you more time for that, but we'll go into our speech. I'm assuming that you have connected with the sense of loss that you've had. My dear friends and relatives, I have come to condole with you in your great bereavement. We will sit together in our grief and mingle our tears together. Holding this wampum, I now wipe the tears from your eyes so that you may have peace of mind. When a person is in great grief caused by loss, his ears are closed up so he cannot hear. Such is your condition now. I therefore use this wampum to remove the obstruction of grief from your ears, so that now you might have perfect hearing again. When a person is in great sorrow, his throat is stopped with grief, and such is your case. I therefore use this wampum to remove that obstruction of grief, so that now you may enjoy perfect breathing and speech. When a person is brought to grief, he seems to lose sight of the sky and is crushed by sorrow. I therefore use this wampum to remove the mist from your eyes, so that now the sky may be clear to you. So that ends the earliest version of the speech that I was able to come up with. Then I'm going to use next a more contemporary version of it, which is going to go through the same steps, but it's a slightly more modern way of looking at it and has to do with a wider range of concerns. When a person is brought to grief by loss, he seems to lose sight of the sun. I therefore use this wampum to remove the mist, so that now you may see the sun rising over the trees in the east, and watch its course, and when it arrives in mid-sky, it will send forth its rays around you, and you shall begin to see your duties and perform them as you did before. I also use this wampum to remove the obstacles created by deeply held notions that sometimes stand in the way of finding new knowledge and new experience. Using this wampum again, I now take away the fog that surrounds your eyes and obstructs your view, that you may come to see things in a new way. Next, I use the wampum to open your ears so that you may hear as if for the first time. Finally, I use this wampum to remove from your throat any obstruction caused by old ways of speaking to others, so that you might communicate to your friends and relatives in a loving way. I now return to you the wampum which I received from you when we began, and I conclude my discourse. It's a moving ceremony in its simplicity.
Deeply. So interesting. Since last night, I've been praying for someone who's dear to me, and the prayer has been to lift the fog. The fog, lift the fog and allow the sun to come through. And I just was like very strongly connected to grief as a fog.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that, like driving through the fog, like it is so blinding.
Yeah.
And it holds so much. It's water with weight, right? Fog is water.
It's a perfect analogy.
Right, that is just there and like blindly. So, to really lift the fog, just my heart opens to that for all of us.
Yeah.
For all of us, whatever fog we happen to be in, whatever heaviness is blinding us or clogging our ears and our throat, like may it be lifted.
Mm-hmm.
May it be lifted. And the wampum is the shell, right?
Yeah.
Right, so also part of the water family.
Yeah.
to really...
And what does the shell do? It protects what's inside of it.
Right, what's precious.
Yeah.
And it's the broken shell,
Yeah.
right? The wampum was all the broken pieces.
Yeah.
So, what's our prayer, Bob, for everybody out there? What's our prayer?
Well, my prayer is that out of the brokenness of our collective experience at this time in this place, that we can heal, that we can grow, that we can become better than we started out.
Right.
That at this time of crisis that we find ourselves in right now, with old forms falling apart, that somehow we can come together as a group and pick each other up.
Let it be so.
Yeah.
And I am really going to take with me that metaphor, as I understood it through your meditation, that the broken pieces, like the broken shell pieces, are sacred.
Yeah.
If we pick them up and put them together, string them together, rather than let them be scattered. We string them together. There's sacred healing there.
Out of something broken,
Right?
we can create something that's whole.
So my prayer for anyone who's watching, know that any of your broken places is really a beautiful sacred piece. And at least for right now, in this moment, we join them. We string them together and hold them. And I so appreciate the power of your voice in really bringing that to us today. Because I know those words are not, what am I thinking of? Like they're not random. They are very carefully chosen. And I really felt that. So what a beautiful gift you gave us today. You really gave us such a good
pleasure,
gift. Bob! Oh my God. It's never, ever a disappointment being in your presence. There's always something so beautiful and powerful.
And I feel the same way about you and all the insight that you bring to people here.
Thank you, Bob. How are we doing on time, Bobby? Perfect timing?
Yeah, I couldn't do anything
because we were in prayer, but we are coming to the close.
Yes, just end whenever you...
Okay, so as our timekeeper. So, Bob, all our sacred special things, I love you.
I love you back.
I really do, and may your heart and mine be forever joined in healing. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time, have a great week. Good.